Welcome, everyone. I'm the president of US Cloud. I'm going to give you a little bit of a snapshot just kind of on the market as it stands today. As I said, it's pretty nascent. Who are the players? What are your options? What should you consider? Kind of pros and cons of each. And then we're going to be talking to Cathy Ellis. So she is a longtime sourcing and vendor management executive. She runs her own consultancy. Before that, she was with Kaiser Permanente for most of the last decade. We bumped into Cathy. She represented a now US Cloud client, very large health center on the West Coast, our health system. So Microsoft, for years and years, had the premier support model for enterprise level support. And it is still in process of being shifted into the new unified support model. The primary difference in unified support is that instead of purchasing set amount of hours for the areas that you think you need support, it is an all or nothing formula-driven pricing scheme. For some people, that's okay. For other people, they're seeing cost increases of 50, 100, 200, 400%. So some folks are really, really getting kind of walloped. And that is what has been driving this kind of new market opportunities, people getting surprised both in year one when they switch and then also beyond. In the last, let's call it year and a half, it's really started heating up. Most of the people we talk to now, they've got permission to stay in Premier for one more year, or they are coming up on year two. So there are definitely some advantages to staying with an OEM. So they are the only ones that have direct access to the tenant in your cloud services and the code in that. They are obviously the deepest. They're experts. It's their product. The new kind of online library of a lot of stuff that was engineer led before is now available DIY tools that if you have the internal capability to do stuff yourself and tap into that, we've heard really good things about that being useful. Obviously, global organization 24/7, and they have the broadest dedicated service engineer, support engineer access of anyone in general. So they're the OEM, right? The cons, obviously, super duper expensive for most people. And I think more importantly is that it's just inflexible. The unlimited hour model has also really started to stretch their support systems. Their response times are getting slower and slower, even in Premiere, even for Seves, or I'm sorry, even in Unified, even for Seves. They're missing SLAs. They don't even call them SLAs anymore. As they're having quality issues, they're leaning harder and harder on outsourced and offshore resources. You can tell if that engineer or their supervisor has a V- badge. That means they are a vendor and most likely offshore. So leaning on those third parties a significant portion of the time now, people have been complaining that the quality's really fallen. There's also some kind of hidden gotchas that you got to pay attention to when you're moving to unified. As just an example, they'll add 30%. You think you're buying a DSE at X rate or proactive credits at X rate, and they're going to tack on another 30% for TAM involvement that sometimes isn't called out. Also, if you have bought licensing without software assurance, it is a 5-year look back instead of a 1 on online in the formula and can be really punitive. I'm going to make one quick point that people should really be aware of. A lot of folks we're talking to are kind of really fixated on either year 1 or year 2 when they're moving to unified. In a lot of cases, year 1 gets blunted by kind of one-time discounts that they'll throw at you or SA credits. So if you have a lot of cloud migration in your future, whether it's M365 or Azure, and you're moving to the cloud, you really need to pay attention on what that's going to do, again, inside the formula, because we've seen a lot of folks. Gartner has a good example of an organization that moved their on-prem data center to the cloud. From a cost standpoint, they didn't count on how much that would increase their service contract, and their support went up almost 500%. So it's something that you really, really need to look at and look at your kind of 5-year roadmap when you're considering this piece. Now, questions, just if you're in negotiations, talking to them, leverage points that you can push them on what their initial response times are, push them on how much of it is going to be outsourced, that 30%, make that account team work through with you, looking at your roadmap, what projections, at least for year 2 and 3 will look like. And also they had a pretty big breach in December 2019, 250 million Premier support records got exposed. Again, just kind of something that you can use as a fulcrum inside of negotiation. The other option that people are looking is, as it's gotten to be maybe a little bit more acceptable from Microsoft's standpoint to use a third party over the last 2 years, people are turning to their big VAR or LAR or their cloud service partner or their MSP. And again, it depends on how your organization runs and is set up, but there are pros and cons to that. So pro is if you're leaning on kind of your internal help desk and beefing that up and getting supplemented by a big partner, you do have a little bit more control of that. You probably have a existing relationship with the partner that's selling you either consulting services or your licenses. They do a lot of those folks, those third party have really, really competent engineers. A lot of them are project focused versus break fix focused, but they do have good competencies and they're almost always less expensive than Unified. The cons that you need to watch, a lot of those top engineers that they have do not work 24/7. They are not set up to do those top engineers that you might need are not set up at the drop of a hat to get them. A lot of the MSPs that claim 24-hour support are just dealing with low level L1, L2 on the 24/7. Also, a lot of these folks tend to be specialists, so they might have a little bit limited breadth and depth. It's very difficult right now, I know from experience, hiring good engineers. So difficult to make up that gap on that breadth and depth to cover the whole Microsoft stack. And also, and this is kind of important, you will always have to have a certain portion of these tickets that escalate to Microsoft because they're tenant cases or a bug you need to get in the code. It's kind of binary. If you're not really good at solving a lot of those complex cases that don't need to get into the code and you escalate a lot, it's either going to be super expensive to use the high-end partner agreements to get to Microsoft and you negate a lot of the savings promised, or you use the lower end tenant case kind of included core support and it is slow and getting slower. It's really important on those that you push on exactly how they're escalating and how often they're escalating. And that gets to just kind of some questions. First, understand, are they telling you they're going to support you and help augment? Or are they saying, no, 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 we can take the whole thing and you can get rid of your entire support contract? The other part is really pushing on their response times, especially around the non-business hours. Ask very specifically kind of what they're staffing, what kind of engineers they've got in second and third shift. Are they are they in the US? Are they using another third party out of the country to save costs, et cetera? So really probing around where those resources are and what level they are. Also, is this something that they're really focused on, or are they just kind of throwing it out as an another offering that they have? Because it is a very specialized service to be able to do that. How much of your revenue comes from actually doing resolution support tickets? Then finally, just kind of getting into the details on what kind of partner agreement they have with Microsoft, how they do escalations to Microsoft. Do they have SLAs around that, written SLAs, et cetera? Really important to kind of dig into what happens when you need to get that emergency ticket to Microsoft in the middle of the night because your Azure system is down. The third option, when you're looking at an independent third party like us, the reason we got in this game was to provide support that can cancel your unified contract and save a lot of money. That's why we got into it. We said, we're going to do this. We're going to save people money and give them comparable or better support. We focus a lot on response times. We have financially backed guaranteed SLAs for both response time performance as well as escalation SLAs. For the independent parties that are getting into this game, it is all we do. Very specifically designed, both infrastructure and staffing and everything around providing that service. And we do staff level 2 through level 4, even engineers, so DSE level engineers. Now, cons, if someone is just looking for a cheaper way to escalate everything to Microsoft, that's not a good fit. The name of the game for this independent model is for 80-ish% of tickets to be able to be solved in-house. That's how you save money. The emergency tickets go quickly through a Premier for Partner agreement. The low-end tickets that are bugs, et cetera, go through a little bit slower process to Microsoft. So the two downsides inside of this, it's a different model. There's an extra step in between. We've worked really hard to get that to be pretty close to as fast as it would be if you were in Unified. But there is another party involved in between you and Microsoft. And again, one of the trade-offs is for those non-emergency tickets that have to go to Microsoft, those can be slower. The trade is, those are going to take a little bit more time. Now, generally, those are less than 5%, 10% with a good partner, but those are going to be a little painful, but they'll get done. Also, just one other thing to watch for, some of the new entrants are leaning pretty hard on offshoring to save money and are actually cheaper sometimes than we are. It depends on what you care about. If you're really hanging your hat on quality, or it's important to you to have US only resources, you'd look at somebody like us, but there are others that are looking at a slightly different model that are coming onto the scene now. Very detailed on how you escalate to Microsoft. That's kind of like the critical, you really need to know how that works with a partner. Are they staffed overnight? And also, can you provide me other things that I would be losing? Can you give me DSEs in the technical categories I want? Can you give me support like for projects and proactive engagements like system health checks, et cetera? We actually have a RFP template that we're going to provide on the back end of this to participants, as well as some other materials that'll get deeper into some of the questions that you should be asking. But at the high end, you just really need to pay attention to and understand the processes within a partner that's not Microsoft, how they solve those tickets, because it makes a big difference at the end of the day, especially if you have a high severity case that's an emergency, and especially if it's off hours. So in general, those are kind of your three choices to consider. It is now a viable option to be looking at this, like Remedy Street for Oracle or Spinnaker. This is now an actual option, and that's when I'm going to turn to Cathy and talk to her just a little bit about her experience. So US Cloud's added somewhere around 250 clients in the last 12 months. So there are a lot of people taking the plunge on this, and one of them was with Cathy.
Thanks, everyone. So my client is a $12 billion healthcare provider who provides services in the western part of the U.S. The client, as all kind of healthcare clients in 2020, because of COVID, was experiencing significant budgetary challenges, specifically on the OpEx side. So as a result, we were looking for opportunities where we could address the OpEx shortages and also improve the service.
When you got into this, I'd asked you whether it was procurement trying to push it down into IT, or whether it was kind of a joint scenario. We see a lot of times procurement having to convince IT that this is an option. How did that dynamic play out with them?
So luckily for me, my client, the sourcing organization and the IT organization, were looking for opportunities for cost savings. And again, one thing that I really want to highlight is my client was having significant service issues as it pertained to Microsoft and service. So they were really looking for a viable alternative. So we partnered together. We went through basically the traditional type of RFP process. We gathered requirements. We factored in the roadmap. One of the things that you pointed out, Matt, about really understanding what that future roadmap looks like, specifically with my client, they were also going through a similar transition with Azure. And so they had large unexpected uptick in their costs. And when we looked at what the roadmap was going to look like for the next 2 to 3 years, we realized it just wasn't sustainable.
Yeah, if memory serves, they had the first time around, they had those SA credits that really blunted it.
Exactly.
And kind of forgotten that those kind of go away in year 2, years of all up in year 1.
Right, and as you pointed out in your discussion, there's the formula too. So when the client looked at the baseline, and it's very important for all the sourcing call today to really understand what that baseline looks like, because that baseline is going to drive your cost, not just for year 1, but going forward as well, specifically if you're making that transition from Premier to Unified. There was going to be basically a 80% uplift in my client's budget. So that is, as I said, it just wasn't sustainable given the budgetary impacts that they had in 2020 related to COVID.
And again, in just generally rough terms, I think the unified bill that they were staring at was somewhere around $3 million. And when we were able to kind of look at and not pick and choose a little bit, but also have a lower rate, I think we brought them in closer to 800,000. And so big difference. And
Actually, it was 3.5 million. So
in terms of what were the things that that your CIO and the folks that were involved cared about at the end of the day? Because Microsoft did come down pretty close to us in price in the end, at the very end. So talk a little bit about what the fulcrums were that made the difference to them.
So the big differentiator for my client was the fact that US Cloud offered a financially backed SLA. That was so critical. So Microsoft will indicate that they offer an SLA, and you will see that. But in essence, it really is an SLO. So it's the service level objective. It's aspirational that they will provide the support within a certain time period. But if they do not do that, there's no financial penalties to Microsoft, and there's the operational business impact to the customer. So that was the number one. The second piece that was very important to the client was the client also had a lot of add-ons, so designated support engineering support. And with Microsoft, there is a minimum required of 400 hours that you had to procure. Well, my client didn't need 400 hours across some of the different categories, such as on the platform side or the O365. But US Cloud offered a 250 minimum requirement. So that was, just think of that from a financial perspective, the difference in those hours. Then the other key part was the fact that US Cloud offers cross-platform support. So Cisco, VMware, Citrix, and my client was a huge utilizer of those products and services. So those were the key differentiators for the client.
I'm assuming since you're here with me today, you agree that this is something folks should look at. So I'm just wondering if there's any other advice you have to give people that are maybe considering looking at this.
Well, I would just say from a sourcing perspective, we all have targets that we have to hit in helping our internal customers. So I would encourage you to pursue this as an opportunity. I'm still engaged with the client. I do a check-in every quarter, and they are very happy. So they are just ecstatic about the service and the support. And I would encourage you to, at least before making a decision, you can at least get pricing from US Cloud or another third-party provider or a VAR, and at least put pressure on Microsoft.